Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you very much for your time and attention. It's very much appreciated, and I hope I'm going to give you some good value for it. My name is Tom Hadley. My business is called SUFU, and I'm a specialist in brand positioning, brand messaging, copywriting, and in the design and writing of marketing campaigns and the assets that go with them. I've worked very much on an agency model. I don't really consider myself a consultant. I don't really work in a consulting way. I do fixed projects with fixed outcomes for people to help them showcase themselves better. So let us dive in. I suppose the first question I should answer is why did I create an agency model? Why is that the way that I work? Well, it's what I know. It's what I've done for 22 years. I've had a long career in advertising, digital creative, digital marketing. And on the left of screen there, you'll see some of the people I've worked for and some of the accounts that I've worked on. There are many, many hundreds more. These are just a few of my personal favorites. But I founded SUFU in 2011, co-founded it with my wife. And for a long time, we just ran as a small boutique marketing agency, doing all the stuff you'd expect us to do for people, building websites, creating marketing campaigns. But I started to become a little bit jaded about what I was doing, and I lost the love for it. And in 2021, my co-founder decided to go back to client-side marketing, which was a good thing. So I took the opportunity to burn my business to the ground, I suppose, and rebuild it from scratch and rebrand it. So the question I should probably answer is, why did I do that? Why did I pivot so hard in 2021? Well, that's really the story of the last 10 years of marketing, the Web 2.0 era. And I think it can be summed up in one word, and that word is more. Just more. More digital mud being thrown at digital walls and hoping it sticks. I wasn't enjoying it as a practitioner. I'm not sure a lot of people these days enjoy consuming a great deal of marketing. And I draw your attention to the stat at the bottom. 89% of the stuff that we're putting out there, to be honest, might as well not have been made in the first place. And that's how I felt. I felt like I was being asked to create too much stuff that might as well not have been bothered to create. So why did this happen? Well, I think there's two things. I think we've spent a lot of time in the last 10 years developing tools that don't necessarily make marketing better. They just make it easier to churn out. And perhaps the bigger problem is the problem of algorithmic control, because it pains me. It makes my heart bleed for founders and marketers that we have so little control over who actually sees the output of what we do. Just this week, TikTok, for example, announced that they were taking away the ability to link out from TikTok posts to third-party e-commerce platforms. So my industry's been telling you for the last 18 months, 2 years, got to be on TikTok. And people have gone, yeah, I can use that. I can use that for lead generation. I can use that for social selling and e-commerce sales. And now the rules of the game have been summarily changed upon you. And you've got to, yet again, play the game that the big tech platform wants you to play. And I don't enjoy playing this game anymore. I don't think you guys enjoy playing it very much either. So the question is, what else can we do? How are things changing? What's coming up in the future? And what have I decided to devote my time to doing that's more productive and useful? And that leads us to the main part of today's talk, creating brands that people want to believe in. Because that is still, winning hearts and minds is still the bedrock of marketing, always has been, always will be. And I think it's a bit of a lost art. Let's begin by talking about what brand is. What is it? There's a million different definitions. Probably my least favorite is the most famous, actually, which is the Jeff Bezos quote: brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room, because that rather arrogantly presupposes two things. First, it presupposes that when you left the room, anybody actually talked about you versus the millions of other things they could have talked about. And indeed, it presupposes that they actually noticed you were in the room in the first place, when I think that's the problem a lot of us feel, is that we just don't even get noticed we're in the room. So let's ignore Bezos, let's set him aside. There is another definition that's quite popular, which is that brand is a kind of promise. And I think that's helpful as a starting point, but it's not the be all and end all. So let's dig into what is this promise and how does it become a brand? What you guys as founders are great at is designing value, designing products, designing services that are an asset, that has a logical, explainable value. And we all spend months, years even, working on that, working on what that value is, how to bring it out to people, how to create the outcomes that transfer that value. And that becomes our promise. That really is the beginning of it. The promise that we've done the first principles thinking on this, and that we've designed something that has a value. And if we think about how we actually spend a lot of our time, certainly in the startup phase, we are the promise. Literally, we, the founders, are the embodiment of our promise. We spend most of our time networking, talking to investors, pitching, talking to our early customers, being the embodiment of our promise. And to be honest, if the limit of your ambition is to be a solopreneur or a lifestyle business, that's all you need. And this talk really probably is not for you. Go find yourself a good personal branding consultant and carry on doing that. But if your ambition is greater than that, and if your desire is to scale your business to a considerable degree, then you are not going to be able to remain the embodiment of your promise. That is an inevitability. It is a certainty. And at that point, you have to start thinking, how does my promise gain representation? Representation either in the form of media or representation through people other than you getting out there and communicating your value. And that's where we come to a problem. The problem is all that logical value that you created doesn't mean a thing when it hits the reality of the real world, because as Bill Bernbach, one of the most legendary figures in the history of advertising, said, the truth isn't the truth until people believe you. And he was right. And I think we know very much in the world of today. Bill Bernbach said that a very long time ago, and he'd never met Donald Trump, and he'd never encountered the internet. But I think we all know that the truth nowadays is very much what people believe, not what it necessarily factually, scientifically actually is. So when we come to brand design, how do we start to design belief? And the key thing that I would like you, it's a hard thing to accept, but the thing that I think most people do wrong is that they think that brand is some kind of distillation process. They think it's all of that first principles thinking, all of that logical value and those outcomes and the usage just made succinct. And that's it. I just need a simple way of communicating everything that I've worked out, job done. That's not what brand is. Because brand is something that is a connection. It's about what you want to get across and somebody else's ability to accept it. That's what makes a successful brand. So it's a conversion of truth into belief. And we need to understand that in order for that to work, in order for what we say to be perceived as truth and be converted into belief, it needs cognitive acceptance and it needs emotional acceptance, because human beings are emotional animals. So that's my first key point to you today. Designing your product and service, designing your brand are not the same thing, and they are two different processes that require two different mindsets. Now I'm going to bring in two heroes of mine to help me explain this and delve into this a little further. On the left, Mr. Rick Rubin, legendary music producer. And I love this quote by Rubin. I think it's very instructive. It's not necessarily the most original quote, but I like the way he expresses it. He's really re-expressing the famous Henry Ford quote. If I asked them what they wanted, they'd have said faster horses. But the point is, in this particular quote, is he defines that the audience only knows what has come before. The only way that we have of deciding whether we accept something is by looking at what we already know. And the word for what we already know is history. And then we come to my hero on the right. That is Yuval Noah Harari, the Israeli professor of history and author of Sapiens and Homo Deus, if you've ever read those two fantastic books. And I was watching a keynote a few months ago where Harari was talking about artificial intelligence in the future. And he said something that really stopped me in my tracks. It was very simple. He said, history is biology plus culture. And I thought, wow, that's beautifully simple and beautifully profound. Because actually, when we think about what our audience already knows, it is entirely based on biology and culture. So let me explain. The key word really in the biological part of it, I think, is empathy. And I've seen other people. I know that a few months ago, Hugh Stafford Smith gave a talk to this group where I saw him mention empathy as being something particularly important. And empathy comes in two forms, emotional and cognitive, those forms of acceptance that we need to create. And empathy is the output. It is how we, once we consider something and decide how we feel about something, empathy is how we output it. Culture is simply the massing of individual people's empathy and finding others who share the same views that we do and creating a suitable critical mass of it. So if we look at it simply in that way of saying, yes, the formation of empathy and the massing together of empathy is the thing that creates the culture of acceptance that we need in our audience. So how do we access that? Well, for that, we need to take a brief look at Daniel Kahneman. I'm not going to dive deep into Kahneman. I'm sure most of you already know who he is. He is the father of behavioral economics and the author of a very famous book called Thinking Fast and Slow. The main thing I want you to just consider with this slide is the numbers, because we know as consumers, we make decisions very, very quickly using our intuitive systems, brain systems. And those things are based on history. Those things are based on the biology of the brain plus our cultural map, such that if I say to you, would you like to buy a cup of coffee? It's £1. You go, yeah, absolutely. Sounds like a bargain. Hang on a minute. How do we decide that was £1? That £1 was good value quite so quickly? We didn't sit there and say, one moment, shopkeeper, let me just run back through the last 4 cups of coffee I've had and just recall the exact pricing such that I can, so we have a mental map. We have what's known as heuristics, rules of thumb, 80-20 rules. £1, yeah, sounds good value. If I told you it was £8, you'd have immediately reacted and gone, what? Without even thinking about it. And that's how our decision-making systems work. They work very, very fast, and they're associative. They are associative with our cultural map that we have in our brain about all sorts of things. And I'm using culture, to be clear, in its widest sense. I don't mean culture as in works of art, although that kind of culture is important. I mean culture that is anything that is a human construct. Money is a culture. Religion is a culture. Anything, politics is culture. Everything is culture. Anything that's human made. But the problem is that we can see that consumers spend 95% of their time in that system one mode. Whereas, as we explored earlier, as founders, we spend all of that time creating our logical value in system 2 mode. We spend weeks, months and years thinking everything through so very, very carefully and designing it. So there is a huge disconnect. And that's why brand design is not the same as product and service design. Because if we design products and services, we spend our time just thinking in a completely different way, and we burden ourselves with a curse of knowledge that makes it very, very hard to actually design great brands. Let's do a test. Let's do it. Let's play a game. Nothing complicated. Let's do a product brand brief. Right. We're going to create a soft drink brand to rival Coca-Cola and Pepsi. No major task. How might we approach it? If we came at it like, let's come at it as we are, as founders, with our system 2 thinking, we'd probably have some of the thoughts, if we brainstorm it, that are in that list below. And some of them are very logical. You know, some of them are speaking to sort of product market fit and packaging and commercial considerations. But the first 2 on that list are a bit more sensory. They're a bit more aesthetic. So it might be easy to kid ourselves that we've done the fluffy stuff. We've done the empathy bit of this by thinking about things like taste and color and those sorts of things. But we would be deluding ourselves, because the truth of the matter is, if we did it that way and we did all those things, whatever the hell we ended up designing, we would not have designed this. Because Red Bull is the 3rd largest soft drinks brand in the world. And it was designed as a brand with none of those things. In fact, I'm going to go back a slide. Now you know what it is. Does Red Bull fit any of the descriptions in that list? No. Tastes weird. Looks, well, I won't say what it looks like. It's wickedly expensive compared to a can of Coke or Pepsi. It's not cross-generational. For many years, it only had one flavor, and you could only buy it in that one stupid little can. How did this work? They broke every rule of logical founder thinking because they designed a brand rather than thinking about it just like a product or service. They thought about it like a brand, and they thought very carefully about the culture that brand was going to live within. And you can see it. I mean, I grabbed this slide. This is the sort of the breakdown of how Red Bull pushed it. And you can see this is a slide that is all about culture for a particular group of people. You might think you're creating a niche product doing this, but of course, actually Red Bull, became far more than that. And I would suggest that is largely down to the quality of the brand and the emphasis on culture. So I know that's a really big brand example, and I don't like, when I'm talking to founders and talking to SMEs, I don't really like using huge corporate brands because people don't find that very attainable. So how do you do it? How do we do it? What's the actual process where we can start to use some of that same thinking for ourselves? So the first part of it, those of you who know me will have heard me use this word many times. The first part is to think about how our brand is framed. And framing, let's say, requires us to go and look at our audience, look at their culture, look at their experiences, and work from there. And there's 2 halves to that sort of analysis. You're probably more familiar with demographics. They are the thing that have been the more traditional way of looking at designing brand and creating the sort of personas. I'm not a big fan of the traditional persona, if I'm honest. I'm not a big fan of, this is Debbie, and Debbie's 46 and she lives in Milton Keynes, and she's a housewife and she's married to Bob, and Bob works in the city, and it doesn't tell you how people feel. What I find more useful, I wouldn't say don't throw demographics away, it can have its uses, but what I find is much more useful is to think about psychographic profiling. Think about people's lifestyles, think about their attitudes, think about their values, think about their beliefs. That's their culture. If you do that work, you determine the cultural map that people probably likely have in their heads. And then you take that logical asset value that you designed, because that's still absolutely vital, and you combine it with the psychographic profiling. That's really what I do. That is my the work that I do in the early stages of working with clients. That's how I do it. I take that, I drill out of them everything, all of the forms of value that they have. I go away and do some psychographic profiling, and then I design from there. I design the ideas, the concepts, the messaging that seems to me to push those buttons in an effective psychological way. So that is how you arrive at effective framing. And ultimately what it brings you to is a really strong proposition, brand proposition, not just a product proposition, but a brand proposition. The second part of it, after you've done the framing work, is then signaling. And I chucked up here just for fun a brand that I think is a really great example of it done well, and that brand is Go Henry. I'm sure many of you will know them. They are a fintech product aimed particularly at kids, but also, you know, for parents. I've been a customer of Go Henry. I brought my daughter up on with Go Henry cards and teaching her how to save money, how to save, how to spend, and having her first debit card and an app on her phone. She absolutely loved it. I absolutely loved it. It was brilliant. And I think that the way that Go Henry signal is really, really well done. They've understood a lot of things. They've understood their market. They speak to people. They've got personalization, and it's really well put together. So if there's an example to go look at, I think it's that. And I especially like I noticed they've done an eco card, and the signal with that eco card is great. The signal is, when you finish with this card, put it in the food waste bin. It's actually designed to be composted. I think you have to cut the chip out of it, but it's designed to be composted. So I love the idea there that they're signaling to people something very, very different and unique about this particular card. I believe it's the only one that you can actually just stick in a food waste bin rather than in normal recycling or the regular bin. In that green box over on the left of the slide, hopefully this is starting to make some sense, because you'll probably recognize the list of things in that box, and you're going, hey, that's brand guidelines. That is, I know it's that's brand guidelines. And you're right. Interesting to note, one small thing about that, hidden in my list of language signals is the word stories. And I don't think I can go past this point without just saying one thing that which is also a problem with my industry, is I'm afraid I'm one of those people who think that the whole nature of storytelling is a little bit over-egged. I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think it's a wrong thing. It's absolutely a useful tool, but it is one of many. And I would say that together with the Web 2.0 culture of more, I think storytelling has been misunderstood, misrepresented, and is now contributing to some of the worst marketing content on the internet. People don't really understand what to do with it. They think it means, oh, telling my story. Okay, in 1972, I started my business. No, that's not what storytelling. When people say storytelling, they mean signaling. They just like the word. It's just easier to sell storytelling to you lot, to be quite honest with you. But it's much more than that. It's much more than that, and it's more varied than that. So do just take that with a small pinch of salt and understand what you're really doing with storytelling. You're trying to signal. If we have that strong proposition, if we have that effective signaling, that is how we get people to ultimately believe what we do. However, there is another problem looming, not even in our future, it's looming in our today now. And that is the problems that visual signaling and language signaling are under massive threat from generative AI. And that's why I want to talk a little bit about signaling in the future, because it's going to have to change. And I'm going to go back to my hero, Yuval Noah Harari, because he said something else in that keynote. I'll share the link to that keynote later. It's brilliant. It's really worth watching. He said something else. He said the last 10 years have been the battle for attention, and the next 10 years are the battle for intimacy. And again, I thought this was pretty smart thinking, because actually, as I've described it, that Web 2.0 era of more is exactly a battle for attention. We call it the attention economy. I'm sure you all know that phrase. But we have super saturated the battle for attention, and people are starting to become drained of interest in it. And most of the smart people that I know in marketing are starting to talk about the language and the tools that are needed in a battle for intimacy. They're talking about communities. They're talking about going away from mass market, mass social media, mass public spaces, back to more defined communities. And that very much is the battle for intimacy. So how are we going to do it from a brand point of view? What do the next 10 years require of us if generative AI is going to stomp all over our ability to create believable language signals and visual signals? Deep fake video, deep faked images are going to destroy the believability of those sorts of media. We just won't know what to believe. So how do we stay ahead of the machines? How do we signal our humanity? How do we still create that cognitive and emotional connection with people? I think the way in which it's going to need to move is environmental and behavioral. And when I say environmental, I don't just mean physical spaces. Although, of course, if you've ever been in an IKEA, you know how making environmental design part of a brand has been done brilliantly by IKEA. But even in digital spaces, even in the 2D websites of today, and whatever spaces, metaverse, whatever we think is going to be the spaces of the future, I'm not down on metaverses. I think they absolutely have a role. I think they're currently getting a bad press, but that's just knee jerk. And I think once those sorts of digital environments, digital community spaces come along, we're going to need to think about how our brand works within them. And that's going to be really important. And the second thing is behavior, because behavior is the thing. And I've spoken to a few people I know who work in AI, and I've said, what's the thing the machines aren't going to be able to do? And they said, well, it's behavior. It's the more imaginative stuff, and it's the more behavioral stuff. The machines will ultimately get there. The machines one day will be able to imagine as well as we can, and God knows what happens then. But that's still a ways off. So I think if we think about behavior and we think more about Daniel Kahneman, we think about some of the things that have been stuck in academia for the last 50 years, we can design really exciting things that signal our humanity and make us win a battle for intimacy. Remember, right now, generative AI, as to go back to Rick Rubin, the generative AI also only knows what has come before. It is a large language model. It's based on history. So last two slides to finish up. This is what I think, these are the great outcomes I think that you get from working in this way and looking at brand in this way. And I've included some quotes. These are actual quotes from clients of mine underneath. I think the first thing is that why, that thing that you've had in your head as founders for months and years, the value of your business, you start to see it from that new perspective. And it makes it so much easier for other people to also see it, to share it, and so they can represent you, and so that media can represent you. So it kind of pulls the scales from your eyes. And that's one of the things that I really actually enjoy about what I'm doing, is I enjoy that founders feel really differently about themselves. They feel a weight taken off their shoulders, that they no longer have to be the 100% embodiment of their promise. So don't sleep on that. I think that's worth something. You also then start to see your value, the value that you designed and you've hoped is going to be accepted by other people, start to resonate in them. And that's incredibly powerful. That's incredibly joyful, in that you learn what other people, because sometimes people love something about your product or service that wasn't the thing you intended. It's a bit like listening to a piece of music and somebody can say, well, I wrote that piece of music to make you feel this. And you go, well, it makes me feel like that, which is different, but it's great. So, don't think that your value, the value you conceived, is the only value. Maybe somebody else has a different value. You'll learn about that from doing this sort of work. And then fundamentally, the more commercial practical ask is your marketing just becomes better. You start to make marketing that isn't in the 89% of stuff that everybody just ignores, and it becomes more effective. And that's really due down to creating those cognitive and emotional connections. And you start to realize you can stop telling, and you can start showing, and you can start behaving, and other people will feel it. And it doesn't need to be, everything doesn't need to be an explanation. And that is the end of my talk, but it's not the end of your work here today, because what I would love is for you to now take the principles that I've just explained and go and do something with them for your own benefit. So I have devised an exercise that is based, you will see, is based on all of the principles of being aware of your market and brand framing and brand signaling that I've just talked about. You can go away and see how good you think your brand is. And it'll show you where to do it. I would say this is in beta at the moment. It works absolutely fine, and I think the logic is pretty sound. Might just be one or two cosmetic touches for me to brush up over the next few days. But I would love it if you had the interest to go and actually try this for yourselves. And I will pop a link in the chat and make sure that I've shared it to the group later. But I hope that's just made you feel different. I hope it's made you think differently about the possibilities for your brand. I hope it's made you think that that there are interesting things that are possibilities. And most of all, I hope it's made you think that you don't just have to get on that merry-go-round of the current Web 2.0 marketing way of doing things, and you don't have to play that game, because to be honest, that game is coming to an end and the Web 2.0 era is dying. So let's start looking at what comes next. Thank you very much indeed.
Tom, that was awesome. Thank you very much. Any questions for Tom this morning? Let's have a look in the chat. Paul, then Nick.
Mine's not really so much of a question, but just more of a thank you, because obviously I'm an old advertising person. I wish our careers had coincided when we existed in advertising, because totally get what you mean about how advertising lost its way, and I miss that kind of thought about a brand, how it's created. And I just want to say that I am 100% on your side about this sort of psychological positioning of a brand and how you go into the psychographics of it. Because one of my earlier careers, and this is and it sort of exemplifies why, it's not very PC. I ran a sort of £50 million tobacco account. And when there's no perceived benefit to a product, apart from death, you have to actually come across it from, like, when there's no product benefit, it's all about the psychological benefit. And that taught me something very early on in my career. Build what that personality is all about, and then you plug in your product benefits. So I just, cracking. Spot on.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Nick.
Yeah, I love your I love all of that, and it just really reiterates why I've just appointed you, and that it was exactly the right thing to do. So that's made me feel warm and fuzzy this morning, and a great insight into what you do and the value that I'm going to get out working with you. But the part I like, the creating value in community. So within Pipsqueak, as a design engineers, we've created a valuable community of people that we've helped over the years. I've never really thought about a community of customers, and it's kind of flipping flipping everything on its head a little bit. Can you talk into a little bit of that idea of perhaps your customers as a community?
Absolutely. I mean, I didn't really delve too. This talk was really more about building proposition and building brand. I do have a deep interest in also helping people at the other end of the scale, which is how to actually work with customers better, and how to create not so much I mean, it's related to customer experience, but I think it's extension of brand. It's actually taking brand all the way into customer experience. And I think that's, you know, remember how the web started? Remember Web 1.0 was the web of message boards and communities and portals. And we all sort of, you know, operated in those message boards and things. And some of those forums are still, it's incredible, actually. There's still some of the greatest successes of the internet are actually still in that old format. You know, you look at things like Mumsnet. I've got a friend who works for a platform called oh god, was it? It's an AV forums, which has been going which has stayed as a traditional message board forever. People still love that because people genuinely get a value out of communities, digital communities, that we never really got from Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram. It hasn't they were fun for a while, the big open platforms, but they haven't really worked and they haven't made society a better place. And that's why we're all starting to reject them. So we're coming back around to that way of thinking, but we now have the tech of 20 years later. So whether this is going to become metaverses and those sorts of spaces, or whether it will still be but you know, that's why Discord is popular, that's why Reddit's still very popular. You know, these are more contained things. So I think it is just more meaning. It allows us to be more meaningful with our communities, rather than this whole thing of feeling like we're constantly broadcasting to the entire world, when of course, due to the algorithms, we are not broadcasting to anything like the world. We're not even broadcasting to the number of followers we've got. We're lucky if we're broadcasting to 10% of our followers most of the time because of the algorithms. So why wouldn't we go back and go, do you know what? I'm going to create my own space with my own tribe, and then I can communicate to 100% of the people that I actually care about, and they actually care about me. Why wouldn't we do that? I think that's what we're all waking up to right now. So yeah, I think there's all sorts of things to make it more meaningful, Nick. And I think absolutely for anybody who's, it's slightly different in B2C, and it's slightly different for mass market. But for someone like you, who has, you know, people with a particular skill set, a particular interest, you know, particular trade, then absolutely bring those people together as a community, because there is enormous power in that.
Thanks,
One thing
Nick.
I should throw in, actually, which I don't think a lot's been talked about, is I think one of the most powerful platforms going forward, if I had to make a bet on one, is WhatsApp. I mean, in Startup Stand-Up, we use WhatsApp very effectively. WhatsApp is bringing new social media aspects into WhatsApp in the coming months. There is a trial going on in Singapore at the moment to bring a kind of social media type feed into WhatsApp, which I think for communities like us, and for any community, it creates those walled gardens, but gives us a lot more functionality to do more interesting things. So I can share some links on that. And but yeah, don't sleep on what WhatsApp's doing. Might be the future.
Thanks, Nick. Gary.
Tom, really good presentation. I've got quite a few questions. Hopefully no one's got any more. One is, WhatsApp already do community.
Yes,
and it's quite a good tool as it goes. But again, it's getting people to know it and be part of that. I'm going back to I think it was a quote that said, "People don't know what they want." What was it again? Yes. What was the quote?
It's the audience doesn't know what they want; they only know what's come before.
Okay, so they come before. So how do you relate this to not just marketing, but because we're all parts of startups, this is really rife in the investment world. Because if you speak to anyone who's doing investment, the first thing they'll do is go, "Who's your competitors?" Now, that takes that toe line completely out of it, because if you're inventing something completely new, really truthfully, there might not even be any competitors, but people don't invest in that. So one is, what's your opinion about investing in that sort of thing? People don't know what they want. And that was that one. And the other one is time. Obviously, time and communication, yes, WhatsApp, etc. What is the one that can get that instant hit communication? I know you said WhatsApp, but is there anything else, maybe apart from TikTok? Or what's your view on that?
Well, as I say, I think it's I think just to cover that one, because it's probably the simpler one, is I think I would look more for walled garden type spaces where you can have some control. If you've got an audience, if you've already got a community, look for a space that suits the community, rather than dragging everyone into these public spaces where, you know, naysayers can join in and the whole thing can become corrupted. So, there's lots, I mean, whether it's Discord, whether it's, there is lots of tools out there. I think there will be I think a new set of tools are coming as we start to move away. People want to stop investing in these big mass open public platforms, and I think we'll get better tools over the next few years. And say WhatsApp is just an example of that beginning to happen, but others will do it too. So it's probably a watch this space on that. But on the really important point about investors and what people choose, again, because it's all the same thing. In getting investors to believe is no different, and they themselves only know what's gone before. Now, investors are probably, they are people who are more open to risk. But the thing is that the thing you have to remember about investors is a lot of them, they themselves have been founders, so they themselves still have that logical, explainable value mindset because they've practiced it for years. So the question is, for them, they're interested in that, but they will also be interested. I'm sure we don't have Phil here today, but I'm sure Phil would. So I've talked to Phil at length about this, and I've said to him, I'll tell you the conversation I had with Phil. The conversation I had with Phil went like this. I said, Phil, if I could create a perfect tool that made angel investment 99% effective, I said, I don't think you'd want to use it. And he said, wouldn't I? 99% success rate would be lovely. And I said, yeah, but where's the fun? Where's the fun, Phil? You're an angel investor. You're doing it because you're backing your judgment. You want it to be a cognitive and emotional exercise. And he stopped and he thought about it when he went, you know what? He said, you're right, I wouldn't use it. That tells you a lot about investors. That tells you about their culture. And some of the buttons that you need to push is that you need to make it feel like an attractive thing that got some agency. That's why they do it, particularly for angel investors. VC is probably a bit different, but certainly for angels. So does that help? I think there's a lot there to also be useful from this brand kind of thinking as a as a way of doing it.
Yeah, that was great, Tom.
Thanks, Gary. Rob.
Well, I really like where you're going with this, Tom, especially when you're talking about intimacy and how that's the next 10 years. So I was thinking about big nations, so places like China and Russia. And sorry for going off on one with my thinking. So China and Russia seem to lead by one message to all, a bit like Coca-Cola used to do back in the day. Whereas in the UK, and I'm not trying to be political about this, we're trying to segment the country and lead with mayors. So we're creating a bit more intimacy, it feels, and you feel a greater belonging to where you are. And so I'm trying to think, how does a brand do that at scale? So I can see how a small business can do it, but I can't see how a Coca-Cola can do that unless they start doing segmentation, which is, I think, what you're alluding to with your psycho. Get the words used?
Yes. I mean, I think, yes, you're right, Rob, and that is very interesting. I mean, I think the thing that I find quite interesting, and God, I could riff off into an hour's worth of this, so don't let me, but people want to be led. We don't want life that is constantly cognitively stressful. And one of the interesting things about neoliberalism and free markets and the way that the Western world works is that we place a lot on people. You can have what you like. You can have whatever you want. Have this, have that, have the convenience, have the choice, have whatever you want. And people go, I don't want to choose everything. I want to be kind of told. And that's a different approach to culture. And I think that's what one of the bedrock things that's made advertising in the West very difficult is that we're all clamoring to a million different things. So I think the more that you look at different societies and go, well, we might think authoritarianism is terrible, and it is in a number of ways, but it doesn't mean you can't live a happy life. What does that teach us? What does that teach us about culture and what people want and what, go to Maslow's hierarchy of needs and go, actually in a Maslowian kind of pyramid, authoritarianism worked kind of okay for the first few rungs of that pyramid, probably not the bits at the top, but to a certain extent. So I think, to answer your question, I think it is very difficult in this day and age, especially in the digital space, to really create mass dominance. That's why unless you get in at exactly the right moment, you know, such as a Google, who came along at exactly the right moment in time to dominate a particular fundamental tool like search, digital search, it's pretty hard to do that now. It's pretty hard to design either a product or a brand that's that game changing. So those will always be the vast exceptions to the rule. But even so, it's simply about, you know, I had that slide earlier on talking about culture creating a critical mass, and that is still fundamentally the way to do it. It's through culture. We create allies, we create tribes, and the less polarized we make our world, perhaps the bigger the tribes can be. But we're at rather a polarized point in history right now.
And I can see how your comment about walled gardens would work. You know, effectively, this is what we're doing here. You know,
exactly.
I know what you're saying. WhatsApp, but Zoom, and creating communities and our tribe and trust and our own culture and belief and all those things work in this space really well.
This is it. I mean, that's the thing, is go with the feeling of your own sensations. We love this space. We love this community. I love this community far more than I like spending any time on LinkedIn. My God, it's poles apart. That tells you something. That tells you something pretty undeniable.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Tom. Tom, there's been a lot of love and appreciation in the chat. So if you get a minute, look through.